Okay. First of all, thanks for all the panelists for highlighting and complementing the presentations so that we had building up on the main themes that are operative in Beirut. And in many ways looking at how the normative frameworks created and supported and was dependent also on a political framework, looking at how these things encouraged certain practices to emerge on the ground, and in a sense also creating certain cultural expectations in many ways. I think to go back a little bit in time and look at gentrification in a global context, one of the main traits of gentrification over in its Western manifestations was how there was certain aggregation of efforts to devalue space before revaluing it. And this has always been sort of like one of the main pillars of explaining gentrification theory, how redlining takes place, and in a sense, whether it's directly or indirectly through state policies, you create certain zones that are ready and mature for being devalued. The banks stop giving loans, the state pulls out its services, and then the developers come and you work from within that. In Lebanon, the devaluation process was not area specific. It was the whole country. Civil war devalued the whole country. And in the process of the last stages of the civil war, we know that quite a few either of the warlords or of the people who were working on behalf of the warlords actually worked on consolidating real estate in sectarian terms and easing out sectarian transitions of land deals as part of the way of financing the war when the major international and regional belligerents stopped their funding or cut down their funding. So there was in Lebanon a sort of a devaluation and already a substantive part of the developers bought quite a bit of the land, not a lot, but sufficiently to become the major players in the game. And that, in a sense, after the war became an advantage to them to continue moving onward. The Taif agreement was an agreement on dividing the spoils of the war. So the powerful got their real estate deals continued. The less powerful were given the promise of a rent control and, in a sense, an easing out and a grandfathering of that, what has happened. In many ways, the whole post-conflict in Lebanon transformed Lebanon from a productive country to a rent-seeking country. And that rent-seeking, the rentier economy of Lebanon is, perhaps we have to look at it as well when we are looking at the housing market as such. It's not just the housing market, the whole economy, the whole culture, the whole process of Lebanon moved in that direction. One of the issues that we have to contemplate as well is how much of that rent was going to the regional supporters and the regional belligerents. They had their share of the cake. Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of these people who were involved in the Lebanese conflict somehow were part of the rent-seeking outcome of Lebanon. So I just, in a sense, put these things on the table for further discussions because in many ways the cycle of gentrification that has taken place in Lebanon is not site-specific. There's no redlining. It is moving on en masse. It is all over the place. What we have seen in many of those presentations is that the gentrified become gentrifiers in other parts of Lebanon because they get the money and then they move out into other areas and now they are the powerful people who can purchase land. And this sort of cycle of pushing the city further out is continuing. I think it's also important to reflect back perhaps on the issue that was raised in two of the presentations, but I think I would like everybody to reflect on it, maybe the issue of taxation. But not simply as a question of how do you regulate the market with taxation, but basically what is the social contract in Lebanon? I think in many ways, by not paying taxes but paying municipal fees, we have, in a sense, created a major redlining that involves all of Lebanon. And I think if we can reflect a little bit on the issue of taxation as a sort of not only as a means of enabling gentrification, but also of promoting the culture for gentrification, I think it would be useful, and then we can probably open the discussion for people from the floor.
Well, first a short comment on the devaluation, re-evaluation cycle. If you take several, well, for example, super gentrification. Super gentrification means you have a gentrified area that will be is already gentrified again. So in this case, there's no devaluation. Okay, we can argue if there is a sufficient rent gap or not, or so. But allow me to contradict you about that the war created a devaluation. Well, it does create it in certain area, but not everywhere. If we take the work of Elizabeth Picard, she worked on the war economy in Lebanon, and she identified three main main economic activities. The first one is traffic of drugs, weapons, etc. The second was the Lebanese diaspora, and the third one was the real estate. The civil war witnessed a surge in construction. Yeah, and well, the devalued area were mainly the central district, and there's certain intriguing things happened. For example, at the end of the war in 1990, there was no fighting in the central district. At the time, the fighting was between the area of Michel Aoun and Samir Jaja, in other terms, part of the Lebanese army, far-right Lebanese forces. But what happened at the last day of civil war, the central district were bombarded by nearly everyone. And, well, if you look in retrospective, it's mainly to make it more ripe for what will happen, what will later become Solidaire. Here we have to look at the intertwine between all the capital and the war, and about the change that the war did between productive and rent-seeking. I'm not sure totally about that, because the system, capitalist system in Lebanon, was not based on typical industrial production. And here, for example, lately David Harvey, in his 17th Contradiction of Capital, the latest book, he talked that capitalism is now evolving from an industrial capitalism to trade and services banking capitalism. Well, this happened in Lebanon in the 40s, especially when mainly the trade and banking bourgeoisie represented by Michel Chiha, they shaped the economic system of Lebanon, and mainly he put it as Lebanon is a country of merchant and sectarian communities. Okay, sectarian communities is a topic I can talk a lot about, and I would argue that it's not what it appears. But yeah, and finally about taxation, well, I'm not into, I don't know, taxation. If there is inflation, then the taxes will drop or whatever. I'm not in favor of such solution. Well, it's not my expertise anymore. Thank you.
Okay. You actually said what I wanted to say. No, that's good. I just want to say also about the Civil War period, that there was a paper by Najib Horani, published in 2010, about how the Lebanese elite was connected to global flows of capital and to globalization, and yeah, that there was a major construction boom. So if anybody is interested to read more about that, that's another reference on top of your reference. Also, yeah, banking and services was already, like, you know, the most important sector in Lebanon, and it was explicitly built on the model of Switzerland. So it was a more productive country maybe before, but industry was never the main economic activity. It was always a tertiary sector. And about taxation, I'm not sure I understood promoting a culture for gentrification because there is no taxes, or
there's no value costs for money. I mean, basically, you can leave an apartment empty and you don't have.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You don't have to pay the consequences for it. So, in a sense, you can leave property vacant for years without having to accrue any costs.
Yeah, no, definitely property tax. I think it's one of the proposed reforms that some people are working on. Actually, am I right? Like some activists are working on. You have, well, that's funny actually, because there is the Real Estate Developers Association Lebanon that is complaining so much about the amount of taxes that they have to pay, right? Like, it's like, yeah, 38% of our profits go to taxes, and you know, there is a registration fee, there is a property transaction fee, and I mean, yeah, if you look at the numbers, they pay a lot, but of course you know that their profits are enormous, so it's kind of funny that they complain about this. So I'm not sure if, I mean, the taxation of empty property, yes, but the real estate developers, they complain a lot about the amount of taxes that they pay. So we'll be interested to look into that. And, you know, like there has been a VAT tax that was introduced in 2002, right? So, so I don't know, like, yeah, that would be something to look into, but I'm not a specialist in taxes. And just to say that Lebanon is also an offshore jurisdiction as well, and I'm looking into that too. So, and it has a lot of non-double taxation treaties, so there is some policy regarding taxes that facilitates gentrification for sure.
I would like to comment a bit on the inequalities in Lebanon, because like if we think in terms of inequalities, I think like the issue of taxation will be beyond, like we should be talking beyond taxation on the property. Like this is one aspect of it. But Lebanon is considered the third most unequal countries in the world. And I think like we really need to be also talking about more than redistributive justice here when we start thinking about taxation systems, because we have also like weak state institutions. Like it is really about building state institutions, but again, it is not only like when we think about when we start thinking about more equal or not. I don't know how to put it. Like the question of taxation is definitely like complex, but I think we're talking more about the distribution of public services and goods. We need to be talking about like revisiting or re-questioning existing governance structures, and about the role of private sector and the role of civil society in having a more equal kind of development. So.
Yeah, maybe just a few words about the this question of taxation, which is indeed like very, very important. A couple of points. Maybe the first is that, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have some specialists, but obviously any reform in terms of taxation is blocked since there is an absence of a budget for the country since 2005. So for now, there is no possibility to have a major reform. So for now, there is really this status quo. Indeed, really intense lobbying from developers, and especially a new association of developers that was created last year to stop any. I mean, they're protesting on a couple of issues, but really taxation is really at the core of their claims. And indeed, taxation, I guess, is very important because that's the key leverage for orientating behaviors in terms of the owners, in terms of the developers, and it's also maybe the best way to collect more financial means for a real urban policy making in Lebanon, such as we often listen that there is no financial means and we have the debt, so there is no way to develop a real housing policy and no money for developing affordable housing. But that's a real leverage, because for now, just to there is local taxation. You have the council tax for residents, and you have the built property tax for owners. And but both taxes are based on the use and not on the ownership of properties. So in terms of the objectives you're pursuing, and in terms of the consequence, it has significant effect in terms of national taxation. So mainly revenue taxation, it's very often bypassed by major stakeholders of the bank and real estate industry, especially through ad hoc administrative structures such as SAL or holdings. And you have also this potential gap in the way the way to think this question, because you have a potential gap between the objectives you want to pursue and the actual results. And in many other countries, for instance, the idea of a tax on property and land capital gain reveal actually counterproductive at the end of the day. And this maybe a last point in terms of taxation is that it's a question that have been tackled in the new decentralization bill that is not discussed. So just to say that is a question that is considered in terms of the policymakers, but still we go back to the first point that any significant reform is blocked by the absence of a budget.
Just one comment. Sorry. We were just, I'm not sure if, in terms of taxation and bringing more money, if that is because the municipality of Beirut has how much money? Like, what was it? 1.7 billion. So I'm not sure if money is the problem here, right?
I think in many ways, one of the things that regulate gentrification in the West, and that's over a long period of reforms, has been sort of fighting redlining. Some regulatory court cases have emerged in the West to sort of control gentrification. The state has played some sort of a mitigator in many ways. In Lebanon, the absence of the state has not only not allowed mitigation to happen, the absence of the state is itself a strategy for the elite. And in many ways, I think we search in vain for the creation of a state when the elite actually use the absence of the state as a strategy for devaluation and revaluation of urban property. Anyway, this is a debate to be held. Let's open the floor for people. We take a question from the back there.
Good afternoon. I have 3 questions. They're from a total different angle. The first one is, as you know, there is now a big drive in the demographic pyramid of the world where we have more senior citizens coming up. We have an inverted pyramid of the world. And how this is related to gentrification in Beirut, because as you know, with the brain drain and the immigration of young people between 20 and 30, the inverted pyramid is forcing old owners to sell their property in order to secure retirement. So, and the new buildings are not built in standards that actually respect senior citizens. So that's a first question. The second question is safety and security. Most of the districts that you have actually studying are districts that are considered safe and secure in times of war. Zuqaq because of the topography, and other districts because of the neighborhood. So how the 2006 Israeli war on the southern suburb have influenced people's choices to leave the suburb and come back to spur development and construction of the Beiruti district. This is very important to actually highlight migration and displacement of population as a direct relation with gentrification. And my third question goes to the banking sector and how we can actually think or brainstorm or innovate into new financial tools such as crowdfunding. Crowdfunding now is a picking trend where you go to the community and they crowdfund projects. So how crowdfunding in the context of Beirut can lead to community housing built by collectives, by land trusts, instead of just blaming the state on finding solution for us? Thank you.
My name is Yahya Shaukat. I research housing policy and rights. Thanks for an exciting panel. I guess my question is for most of the panelists is how do you compel a state and a colluding state to regulate the market, the real estate market, when we already know that there's a lot of interests in there, and is maybe looking at the small rentiers and the Lebanese diaspora the key. They hold the liquidity, they send the money, they're a key player, but they're the smaller players because they're doing it on an individual level. Is there a way to promote an alternative investment that is more sustainable and more equal to them, rather than this being the only one that is easy for them to do? Thanks.
Hello, my name is Mary and I'm a graduate student. My question relates to the tools. It goes mostly to Mona and Marieke. I don't know, yeah, I'm here. My question relates mostly to the tools we choose to understand the process of gentrification. Today you mostly talk about housing occupancy in terms of the social, economic, religious background of the residents. And so now I was wondering if in the case of Beirut, it could be worth looking also at the users of the spaces. And so that would imply looking at daily mobility patterns. And so not only looking at residents, but also at the people maybe commuting to those spaces. So you mentioned AUB students in Ras Beirut, or I don't know, people going out in Mar Michal maybe. So yeah, I was wondering how you would include this topic. Thank you.
I just want to comment briefly on the first question regarding the old owners that sell to secure their retirement. And I think this is really a main issue, not only about retirement, but it is about like social security in general in Lebanon is not very like reliable. And that's why, like many people from the middle and low income, middle and low income earners, they rely on their property as a sort of asset. It is like a guarantee against your that you can sell, or for your retirement, for your when you get sick. So it is, and that's why, like when I was saying, like it is more than taxing the property. Like we really need to reconsider this whole social contract and the income tax in general, in a more like the redistribution of income. And yeah, because you're right, like it is a major issue. And it is beyond housing. And when we start to think this way, maybe the problem is not only in the housing, because in the end, Lebanon is a very small country. Like you can, everything is very close to Beirut. We don't even have a proper transportation systems. So it is all linked together, and we cannot start fragmenting or like talking about housing without addressing a whole package of issues that need to be reconsidered from a socially inclusive, through a socially inclusive lens. And how, like Yahya was asking about, like how to encourage the Lebanese working abroad to invest in other than the real estate sector. And I think it's through diversification of the economy and through having strategic plans maybe to each different area. And then you can channel these people. Like, it is maybe a very big issue and it needs a lot of work, but it is diversification of the economy. Like we cannot be just counting on the real estate sector. Like the agriculture sector, it was very strong before the war, and now the people working in this sector are suffering and maybe soon to become the new poor of the country.
Maybe just two reactions on two of the questions. Maybe on the question about crowdfunding and the question of affordable housing. Maybe first of all, I will say that it should be primarily the responsibility of the state to organize and in many cases fund the any initiative in terms of affordable housing. But to me, one of the major limitations for now, and that's a major one, is the price of land. that is today a key aspect, a key problem in the possibility of building or not affordable housing. So as long as the price of land will be as expensive, and especially it's tied to the fact that there is very little or almost no land policy, and that's a question we didn't tackle today, but the absence of land policy and the impact it has on the control of land prices, for instance, prevent any, I will say, serious initiative in terms of on the construction of affordable housing. And just another short reaction about the idea of compelling the state in terms of regulating the market. I will say that that's one of the elements I wanted to build on in my presentation. But to me, the state is already a key actor instead of, it's an enabling actor. It's a facilitating actor. But the thing is that it's very involved in terms of the organization and management of the property market, not in terms of the housing component. So really this idea of business and social component. And because it's really as a great role in organizing the supply and the demand, as we see, especially through the role of the central bank, you know, even though it's more in a reactive than in a proactive way. And overall, I would say that when we look at the importance of elite politics, I would say that any real regulation of the sector will go against the very interest of the people in power now. So for now, it seems like kind of unlikely.
Okay, let's see. About the diaspora, yes. So for me they are key, but they are key in the sense that I think they are one of the main, the elite diaspora I'm talking about is one of the main causes of this entire real estate drama that's going on in the city. They are investors, they're buyers, and then the people who are sending remittances are actually kind of providing a buffer for the worst socioeconomic shocks, you know? So they're at the same time a pacifier of social unrest. And the Lebanese state is actively trying to extend their nationality policies to include more and more people. A lot of Latin Americans are now, of Lebanese origin are being convinced to take citizenship again. They're encouraged to become tourists, to become investors. So the more I look at the biographies of real estate developers, the more I see that they used to live abroad. They made a lot of money in West Africa, in Iraq, in France, or and they come back to invest it here. So yeah, it would be great if we could think about them as kind of a solution, but I'm not so sure, because a lot of the colluding, part of the colluding state is, I think, a lot of these same, circulating transnational actors. So I'm not sure how to do that. To answer the question about the, to include the mobility, the social mobility or the daily mobility patterns of people, yes, I mean, we look at that, and yes, people don't feel at home in their neighborhood. I mean, it has this kind of influence. But I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure otherwise how to really include it as a tool to understand gentrification, except that it can maybe exert some displacement pressure on people. So, yeah.
To add on the diaspora thing, if you review the history of the relation between Lebanon or the political economic elite Lebanese and the diaspora, mainly those elite use the diaspora in order to keep on extracting money from them. And I think these efforts to give the nationality for these Lebanese now is also in this rationale. As for example, there was a question about the demographic pyramid is changing, young people are leaving, so old people, in order to secure, to feel secure, their retirement, they sell. Well, the question would be, but it doesn't matter if the young people left or not, because there is no social security in Lebanon. Lebanon moved from economic liberalism to neoliberalism. It didn't pass through neither Keynesianism nor a social welfare state. What happened in the 60s is when Fuad Shahab became president, he took some institutions from the army and applied them on the public sector. And that's it. And this is not a social security system. So when, and also when we talk about the absence of state or a new social contract, well, I think the state is not absent. I think the state is very strong state in Lebanon, and here in the same line of reasoning of Hart and Negri about the neoliberal state, which is a very strong state. And to give an example, in a couple of years ago, for example, the real estate sector in Lebanon, I would say that it's 99% everything is legal in it. And when a couple of years ago, there's certain people who start to build on the commons, poor people, of course, the state sent the army, and the Lebanese army shot and killed Lebanese resident, citizen, and other resident in Lebanon, and they killed them and they injured them. And this is a sign of a strong state. But it's a strong state only when it comes to the interest of a certain political-economic elite. So they are strong in sectors like finance, real estate, but they're not interesting in investing in social areas or other. And here there were questions, how to find solution, for example, crowdfunding or other. Well, maybe as an activist, I can sit with you and we can build a certain strategy or tactics. But as a researcher, I would say that we have to think that another political economic system is, there is an alternative can be built, another political economic system than the present one. And of course, I'm not referring to communism or other previous things. All these previous experiences were a catastrophe, but we can start from new. Well, of course, from my point of view, I prefer a leftist Marxist approach, but we can start, for example, with some questions that Tom Slater said yesterday. For example, the city is for who? And we can continue in a, I don't know, in a simple Platonian dialect, question, answer, and maybe bit by bit we can find a certain solution.
Two related points. One is I welcome very much the political turn that the discussion is taking, and I would like to know much more. And specifically, the question of how the political decisions are made. We talk about the state. The state is the result of a political process. And exactly how do the interests that are the pro-growth coalition, which is a good shorthand term perhaps for those that have an interest in the legislative process, how do they exert that influence? In the United States, it's easy to follow because the question is how much money does who give to the candidates for office. But I assume that's quite different here. And in particular, in Bruno's, in the summary, in the material, there's a reference to the fact that class overrides sectarian. And I would be interested to know much more about how class and sectarian relate to the political process and to the decision-making of the state. The state isn't an autonomous entity, it's the result of these processes. How does that actually work? And the other point is, I wonder if we don't contribute a little bit to a political misunderstanding of gentrification when we talk about the gentrifiers, as if the gentrifiers are the people that are moving into gentrifying areas. And it seems to me the gentrifiers are the growth machine. The gentrifiers are the the Saudi capitalists, the builders, the developers, and so forth. And if we simply started calling things by their right name, by highlighting who the gentrifiers are and not blaming the people that are, in a sense, the victims of gentrification and are forced to gentrify. So the second point is whether perhaps the terminology of who are gentrifiers and who are the victims of gentrification would be useful.
I have a question about the contestation to gentrification, just the activist view. I guess we don't have any presentations in the resistance part. So I would like to know about the resistance to gentrification in Beirut. And the second thing, which is related to the first one, I do want to hear about if there is a framework which is based on use value rather than the property value, because we hear mostly about the property owners, the landlords, and what is about the tenants, and if there is a framework of social movements around use value.
Yeah, my questions really, a lot of the presentations seem to focus on the residential side of property, and to what extent is the commercial side, or how are these laws affecting the commercial side? My impression is a lot of Beirut, you have a lot of property commercially which is really not viable, except they're only viable because of old rent laws. They're not really economically sustainable on their own. And to what extent is that an impediment for growth or an opportunity for change?
Well, I'll just talk about the resistance to gentrification. Well, in Beirut, we have a movement for the built heritage, but this movement doesn't care a lot about the residents. And now it started as a kind of a popular movement, and now it turns into several NGOs. So we have an NGOization of the movement. And for these people, they don't mind gentrification in condition that the old houses stays. If you want to talk about tenants, well, there is a sort of union for tenants according to the old law, but they only go to the street or have demands when there is a change is looming to abolish the old contract. Other than that, there's no such movement, although the gentrification is passing through these things. And what's happening, the gentrification is progressing like, in individual cases. And there's a lack of some sort of unity or movement.
Okay. How political decisions are made. Yes, well, I just wanted to make one comment about that because I think Bruno can tell more about the details of that. But I have seen that very often politicians and businessmen overlap. So they are the same people. A lot of politicians are real estate developers or landowners. So it's, yeah, nobody would vote against, a new building law that gives them more exploitation rights. Then, yeah, about the commercial thing. Yeah, most new buildings are actually residential, right? There's not that many office towers being built. The old shops that are on old rent, yeah, they are not commercially viable, I suppose. But I think that, yeah, what I told about Mar Michael is how some of these old shops are disappearing and, being replaced with bars. And, it doesn't really help the neighborhood in that sense. So I think the same with the residents on old rent laws. Like, these people really have nowhere to go. So it's, it's their only means of existence in the city. Yeah.
Like throughout my research, I found out that people biases and the prejudice and sectarian biases disappear when it comes to their own financial interest. And it is many people like who were really biased when they like talking about the other. And then I was asking them, but do you ask about the nationality or about the religion? And no, it's not important. And then I noticed that probably we can see resistance here to uprootedness like through a double lens. Like if you're a property owner, like you will do whatever is, like you will, you're after your own financial interest. Like but if it is your neighbor who's selling, like then you start saying, oh, they are selling to the Shia, they are selling to the Syrian. And I think it is really double. And it is the communitarian political like kind of resistance. But when you're a property owner, like you, and this is what I meant, but somehow when I was saying that it reflects their own inner contradictions, and because it is really like you want to enjoy the money, but then you will complain that we are uprooted from the area. So it is really a lot of contradiction.
Yes, just maybe a couple of words just in terms of commercial properties. It's quite interesting to look at that commercial properties are not part of the reform of rent control. So it means that rent control has been extended to commercial properties till at least 2018, I think. And they just, you have, I mean, prices are just following the inflation now. So it's a kind of a bit of an increase, but it's kind of interesting to look at the dichotomy between commercial and residential properties. And some people say that it's maybe a lot of banks, for instance, in Beirut, have facilities, have all rent contracts, and that maybe is a push for keeping this this advantage. And to go back to question to Professor Marcuse, so how political decisions are made and how coalition exert powers, how decisions are made, I will say that it's often on the ad hoc and informal basis, as we have seen with the reform of rent control, and pretty often with a deal among major political leaders, because it's kind of difficult to prove it, but some observers, some analysts say that a deal has been made on this reform of rent control, along with another deal, including another very important social question, the salary hike for public civil servants, and other question dealing with the Électricité du Liban. So it just shows that sometimes key decisions in terms of urban policy making are tied to issues or tied to questions that supersede urban questions. That you have deal where urban questions are included, but they also include a larger question in terms of policy. And that's why to me you have some significant convergences with the case of the US, and that's why the urban political economy framework is of interest, because you have a big debate to the fact that it's a very situated analytical framework, and that it's hardly transferable to Europe, for instance. But in a way, it's more transferable to Lebanon than to Europe. Because just to give some instance, but here you have the key role of the private sector in terms of financing or implementation of the transformation of the built environment. You have a recall for the public sector, but in terms of ownership or acquisition or the development of land, as Marieke said, a tremendous porosity between public and private actors, and maybe Hariri was the flagship of this porosity, and a great reliance on local funding for local taxation for local authorities or even for the state. So you have some convergences in terms of to understand how and why political decisions are made, and just maybe a last reaction on the dynamics in terms of urban power between class and sectarian powers. That's, I will say, I mean, in my research, a debate still in progress, because I started by overriding, now I'm more intersecting. So I would say that it really comes back to the two faces of power, with maybe the sectarian power, which is really significant in terms of how leaders or political groups impose their power on special neighborhoods or special populations. And it goes with this very important and other face of power in terms of how decisions are made, and how actually on some question, especially on the question of urbanization, you have those kind of coalition where the elite forgets all the political divisions to shape, for instance, the legislative framework according to their own interest. So it's really a kind of dialectical relationship between the two.
Just on the question of who are the gentrifiers, I think in Lebanon one has to look a little bit more closely, a little bit on the micro scale of how the process is taking place, because a lot of people came from the mountains to the coastal areas early on in the 1930s and 40s and settled in those areas, and in many ways a lot of those people are now going back to those areas, collecting whatever money they have gotten as a compensation, and then they are redeveloping in their old villages. But now, in many ways, they are a social factor to reckon with compared to the poorer relatives that stayed in there. There's quite a bit of evidence that's emerging that shows a secondary wave of gentrification that's taking place in the peri-center areas and even beyond, up to about 25 kilometers.